The village of Omugwe whispered of omens carried by the river, of blessings that turned bitter, of promises forged with spirits older than time. Beneath the towering baobab tree that marked the village's heart, the elders spoke of a prophecy. 2 lives bound by fate, their bond a blessing or a curse, depending on the choices they made. Yet few could have foreseen how deeply this prophecy would shape Omugwe, how the laughter of 2 brothers would one day give way to silence, and how envy, like a serpent, would coil itself around the roots of their love. It began on a quiet evening, as the sun painted the river golden, and the air hummed with the whispers of the spirits. Kem knelt at the riverbank, her hands trembling in prayer, unaware that the shadow watching her would change the destiny of her family and her village forever. The village of Omugwe thrived under the embrace of the mighty river that flowed through its heart. Its waters were life-giving, nourishing the fertile soil that produced lush fields of maize, cassava, and yam. The villagers revered the river as a divine blessing, believing it carried the spirit's favor. At the center of the village stood an ancient baobab tree, its roots entwined with Omugwe's history, and its branches a symbol of enduring strength. Omugwe's people lived by the rhythms of the land and the wisdom of their ancestors. They celebrated the planting of seeds, the return of the rains, and the bountiful harvests. Among them were Ekene and Ninkem, a couple deeply respected for their kindness and unwavering bond. Ekene, a skilled farmer, was known for his generous heart, while Ninkem, a healer, was sought after for her knowledge of herbs and remedies. Yet for all their blessings, one absence cast a shadow over their lives. They were childless. For 20 years their home echoed with silence where the laughter of children should have been. They bore this sorrow with quiet resilience, turning to prayer, tradition, and the hope that the spirits would one day hear their cries. As each season passed without a child, the weight of their longing grew heavier. Nkem often found herself drawn to the river, its constant flow a reminder of life's continuity. She would kneel at its edge, offering whispered prayers to the spirits, asking for a child to fill the void in her heart. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a brilliant amber, Nkem stood by the river. The golden light shimmered on the water's surface, creating ripples that seemed to dance to an unseen rhythm. She knelt on the soft earth, her hands clasped, her voice trembling with emotion. "Spirits of the river, ancestors who watch over us, hear my plea," she murmured. "Bless our home with the laughter of a child. I ask for nothing more." The air around her grew still, the usual hum of the evening insects fading into silence. A soft rustling came from the trees nearby, and Nkem turned, her breath catching in her throat. A figure stood at the edge of the riverbank, draped in a tattered robe that seemed to blend with the shadows. His face was obscured, but his presence carried an otherworldly weight. "Do not despair, daughter of Omugwe," the figure said, his voice deep and resonant, like the river itself speaking. "The spirits have heard your cries. You will bear twin sons, and they will be a blessing to your family in this village." Nkem's eyes widened, her heart pounding with equal parts fear and hope. She opened her mouth to speak, but the figure raised a hand, silencing her. "Remember this," he continued, his tone grave. "These children are born under a sacred oath. Their locks shall remain uncut, a symbol of the promise made to the spirits. Should this vow be broken, calamity will follow." As suddenly as he appeared, the figure vanished. A flash of lightning lit the sky, though no storm followed. Nkem fell to her knees, trembling, her mind racing with the weight of his words. When she returned home, she found Akine by the hearth, his face lit by the soft glow of the fire. She recounted the encounter, her voice quivering as she described the figure's prophecy. Akine listened intently, his skepticism giving way to concern as he saw the conviction in his wife's tear-filled eyes. That night, Keen said softly, "Let us pray together." And so they knelt by the hearth, their hands clasped tightly, and whispered prayers into the night. The promise-fulfilled months passed, and the village entered the season of the rains. The river swelled, its waters carrying life to the fields, and the earth thrived under its touch. Ninkem began to feel the stirrings of new life within her, a sensation that brought tears of joy to her eyes. She shared the news with Akine, who embraced her tightly, his voice thick with emotion. "Our prayers have been answered," he murmured. "The spirits have blessed us." Word of Nkem's pregnancy spread through the village like wildfire, bringing a renewed sense of hope and celebration. The women of Omugwe gathered at her home, singing songs of blessing and offering herbal teas to ease her journey. The men congratulated Akini, their hands firm on his shoulders, their smiles wide. As her belly grew, Nkem found herself drawn more often to the river. She would sit on its banks, her hands resting on her stomach, and whisper words of gratitude to the spirits. The villagers, seeing her there, believed her child to be a divine gift. When the time came, it was at dawn, as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky in hues of gold and pink. The midwives worked tirelessly, their chants blending with Nkem's cries. As the sun broke over the horizon, twin cries filled the air, strong and insistent. The midwives laughed and wept, lifting the newborns into the light. "They are beautiful," one midwife said, her voice choked with emotion. "Truly, the spirits have blessed this family." Nkem held her sons close, tears streaming down her face. Their hair, thick and curly, was unlike any she had seen on a newborn. She remembered the figure's words and felt the weight of the promise anew. Ekine, standing nearby, looked upon his sons with awe. "Chidi," he said, pointing to the elder, whose curious eyes already searched the room. "And Deek," he added, gesturing to the younger, who rested quietly in his mother's arms. The naming ceremony was the grandest the village had ever seen. The twins were dressed in white robes, symbolizing purity, and the elder blessed them with sacred water from the river. Ekene and Nkem swore an oath before the entire village to honor the spirit's command, never allowing a blade to touch their son's hair. The village rejoiced, their voices rising in song and praise. The twins became a symbol of hope and renewal, their presence a reminder of the spirit's favor. The bond of brothers. As the twins grew, their personalities began to emerge, distinct yet complementary. Chidi, bold and curious, led their adventures through the village and its surrounding forests. His laughter was infectious, his charm undeniable. Dyke, quieter and more reflective, often followed his brother's lead, his watchful eyes absorbing the world around him. The villagers adored them, often marveling at their bond. Together, the brothers climbed trees, fished by the river, and helped in the fields. Their mother watched them with a mixture of pride and trepidation, knowing the weight of the prophecy that hung over their heads. "Chidi will be a leader," Ikine often said, his voice filled with pride. And Deek, a wise counselor by his side. Nkem, however, noticed the subtle differences in her son's interactions. Chidi's boldness often earned him praise, while Dyke's quieter nature went unnoticed. She saw the flicker of disappointment in Dyke's eyes during village gatherings, though he said nothing. A mother's intuition told her that the harmony between them might one day be tested. A fateful celebration. The test began during the Harvest Festival, a time of joy and thanksgiving in Omugwe. The air was alive with the scent of roasted maize and palm wine, and the villagers gathered near the river to celebrate. Chidi and Dyke played by the riverbank, their laughter ringing above the music and chatter. It was Chidi's quick reflexes that saved the day when a stray goat threatened the king's sacred yam garden. With a burst of speed, he captured the animal, earning cheers and admiration from the crowd. The villagers chanted his name, lifting him onto their shoulders. Dyke clapped along, but his smile faltered. He slipped away from the celebration, seeking the quiet solace of the forest's edge. There, beneath the towering trees, he wrestled with emotions he could barely name, envy, longing, and the sting of being overshadowed. As he sat in the darkness, the wind carried a faint whisper. "You are more than the shadow you cast, Dyke. Your path is yours to choose." He turned, his heart pounding, but found only the rustling leaves. The words lingered, both a comfort and a challenge, as he made his way back to the village where the celebrations continued without him. Foreshadowing the divide, Nkem watched her sons closely in the days that followed. The bond that had once been unbreakable seemed to strain under the weight of unspoken feelings. Chidi, unaware of his brother's inner turmoil, continued to shine, while Dyke grew quieter, his smiles less frequent. Ekina dismissed her concerns. "They are boys, Nkem. They will grow out of it." But Nkem knew better. The river flowed steadily, but its surface could not reveal the currents beneath. She prayed that the prophecy's shadow would not deepen the rift she sensed growing between her sons. For now, the twins' bond remained intact, their laughter still filling the air. Yet, like the gentle ripple that begins in the river's depths, the seeds of conflict had been sown, waiting for the currents of time to bring them to the surface. As the seeds of destiny are planted in Omugwe, the brothers' journey is just beginning. Will their bond endure, or will envy and fate conspire to test them? Stay tuned for part 2 to uncover how their paths diverge. If you enjoyed this part, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter of this epic tale. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think lies ahead for Chidi and Deke? Your support keeps these stories alive. Recap. The spirits of the river answered Nkem's heartfelt prayers, blessing her and Akin with twin sons Chidi and Dike. Bound by a sacred promise, the boys were destined for greatness. Yet, as they grew, Chidi's boldness and charisma earned him the village's admiration, while Dike, quieter and more reflective, struggled in his shadow. Beneath their laughter, a silent rift began to form, as the seeds of envy took root in Dike's heart. Part 2. In Omugwe, envy was a whisper, a silent current beneath still waters. For Dike, it began as a fleeting thought, a momentary ache, but envy once ignored grows like a vine, winding tightly until it strangles what was once whole. As the brothers stood on the cusp of manhood, the choices they made would test their bond and the village's faith in the spirits, like never before. The bond between Chidi and Dike, though still strong, began to strain under the weight of unspoken feelings. Time passed, and the twins grew into adolescence, their personalities sharpening like stones smoothed by the river's flow. Chidi's boldness blossomed into leadership, earning him admiration and trust among the villagers. He was the first to volunteer for a hunt, the first to defend the younger children when they were in trouble. His name was spoken with pride, often in stories told around the village fires. Dike, however, found himself increasingly cast in his brother's shadow. His reflective nature, once seen as thoughtful, was now often overlooked. He became the quieter twin, the one who followed rather than led. Though he loved Chidi, a quiet resentment began to grow within him, an envy he could not name, but one that gnawed at the edges of his heart. One sweltering afternoon, a test of courage came upon the twins. Ekinin, working in the yard, noticed a rustling in the bushes near the goat pen. He paused, his hands tightening around the wooden hoe. From the shadows slithered a venomous snake, its emerald body coiled and ready to strike. Ekin froze, his voice caught in his throat as the snake's unblinking eyes fixed on him. Before he could call for help, Chidi appeared, his steps quick and purposeful. Seizing a sturdy branch, he moved with the precision of a seasoned hunter. In one fluid motion, he brought the branch down on the snake's head, killing it instantly. Akini exhaled in relief, his chest heaving as he embraced his son. The villagers soon gathered to hear the tale, their voices raised in celebration of Chidi's bravery. That night, they held a feast in his honor, the air filled with the sound of drums and laughter. Chidi was showered with praise, his name chanted as the hero of Omugwe. Dike sat on the fringes of the gathering, his hands folded tightly in his lap. He clapped when the others clapped, smiled when the others smiled, but his heart churned with envy. The firelight reflected in his stormy eyes as he watched Chidi bask in the villagers' adoration. That night, he slipped away into the shadows, seeking the solitude of the forest. Beneath the ancient baobab tree, he sank to his knees, his fists digging into the earth. The silence of the forest pressed against him, and tears streamed down his face. "Why not me?" he whispered to the night. "Why must I always stand in his shadow?" The wind stirred the leaves above him, carrying a familiar whisper. "You are more than the shadow you cast, Dike. Your path is yours to choose." This time, Dike did not look around. He closed his eyes, letting the words sink into the depths of his soul. He wanted to believe them, yet the bitterness inside him remained, a current too strong to resist. Years passed, and the twins became young men. Chidi continued to rise in prominence, his confidence and skill earning him the respect of all. Dike, meanwhile, withdrew further into himself, his quiet resentment hardening into resolve. He yearned to step out of his brother's shadow, to prove himself as more than Chidi's twin. One evening he approached Ekini as the family sat around the hearth. The flames danced in his dark eyes, and his voice was steady but charged with emotion. "Father," he said, "I want my hair cut." The room fell silent. Nkem, who had been tending the stew, froze mid-motion. Ekene looked up, his expression a mix of shock and disbelief. "Why would you ask such a thing, Dyke? You know the vow we made to the spirits." "I do," Dyke replied, his tone unyielding. "But this hair binds me to a destiny that is not my own. I will never be like Chidi. I want to choose my path." Nkem's voice trembled as she spoke. "Dyke, the spirits warned us. Cutting your hair could bring calamity to us all." Dyke's jaw tightened and he turned to his father. "I am not asking, Father. I am telling you. I will cut my hair with or without your blessing." Ikena's shoulders sagged under the weight of the decision. He loved his son deeply and saw the pain behind his defiance. With a heavy heart, he retrieved the sacred blade kept hidden since the twins' birth. That night, beneath the pale light of a full moon, he severed Dyke's locks. Each cut seemed to echo in the still night air, a sound that carried both sorrow and foreboding. As the final strand fell to the ground, a chill swept through the village. The goats stirred uneasily in their pens, and a distant howl pierced the night. Nkem clutched her shawl tightly, a sense of unease settling in her chest. Though the night was warm, she shivered. The curse unfolds. In the days that followed, strange occurrences began to plague Omugwe. Goats disappeared from their pens, their fates a mystery. The river, once clear and life-giving, grew murky and sluggish. The crops, despite the rains, began to wilt, their leaves curling as if recoiling from an unseen force. The villagers whispered of a curse, their voices hushed and fearful. Then came the lion. The beast was unlike anything the villagers had ever seen. Larger than any lion known in the region, its mane black as midnight, and its eyes burning with an unnatural fire. Its roars shook the trees, sending shivers down the spines of all who heard it. No hunter dared venture into the forest, for the creature seemed to be a force of nature, immune to ordinary weapons. The villagers turned to King Okeki, their ruler, for guidance. The king, a man of wisdom and courage, addressed his people with solemn authority. "This beast threatens us all," he declared. "Whoever slays it will be rewarded with a portion of the kingdom and the hand of my daughter, Princess Adayaze, in marriage." The proclamation stirred excitement among the young men of the village, but none dared step forward. All eyes turned to Chidi, whose reputation as a fearless hunter gave the villagers hope. Though he had no interest in wealth or power, Chidi felt the weight of their expectations. "I will face the lion," he said, his voice steady, "for the sake of Omugwe." The path of betrayal. As Chidi prepared for the hunt, Dyke watched him from the shadows, his emotions a storm of envy and guilt. He saw in his brother's actions a reflection of his own inadequacies, and the bitterness within him deepened. But envy soon gave way to a darker ambition. One night, under the cover of darkness, Dyke ventured to the edge of the forest, where the outcasts of Omugwe lived, men and women who had been banished for crimes against the village. They were a ruthless group, known for their cunning and treachery. Dyke approached them with a proposition. "I want my brother captured," he said, his voice cold. "In exchange, I will ensure you are rewarded with wealth and supplies." The outcasts, intrigued by the prospect of both gain and vengeance against the village that had cast them out, agreed. They set their trap, lying in wait for Chidi to enter the cursed forest. On the night of the hunt, Chidi and Dyke ventured into the woods together. Though their relationship had grown strained, Chidi's trust in his brother remained intact. "We face this lion as we have always faced challenges together," he said, clasping Dyke's shoulder. Dyke forced a smile, but his heart was heavy. The shadows of the forest seemed to press closer as they moved deeper into its depths. The air grew colder, the trees gnarled and twisted, their branches clawing at the sky. The lion's roar shattered the silence, and Chidi readied his spear. But before he could act, the outcasts emerged from the darkness, their weapons drawn. Chidi fought valiantly, but he was outnumbered. They overpowered him, binding his hands with rough ropes. As they dragged Chidi away, he looked back at his brother, confusion and betrayal etched on his face. "Why, Dyke?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "Why would you do this?" Dyke said nothing, his gaze fixed on the ground. The weight of his betrayal pressed down on him, but he convinced himself it was necessary. his path to freedom, his chance to escape the shadow of his brother. With envy taking root and the spirit's warning looming, the brothers' bond hangs by a thread. What will Dyke's choices mean for his family, his village, and himself? The twists are only just beginning, so don't miss Part 3, The Consequences of Betrayal. If this story has you hooked, show your love by liking this video, sharing it with someone who needs a powerful tale of family and destiny, and subscribing to our channel. Click the bell icon so you're the first to know when the next chapter drops. And in the comments, tell us, what would you do if you were in Dyke's shoes? Recap. What begins as quiet envy blossoms into action. Dyke's desire to escape his brother's shadow drives him to sever his sacred locks, breaking the spirit's promise and unleashing a curse upon Omugwe. The river darkens, crops wither, and a monstrous lion stalks the forest. When Chidi takes up the challenge to save the village, Dyke's envy leads him to betrayal, and Chidi is captured by outcasts. As one twin rises in the village's eyes, the other suffers in silence, their bond shattered. Part 3. Betrayal is a blade that cuts both ways. For Chidi it meant chains and captivity. For Dyke it was the weight of guilt, growing heavier with each passing day. But in Omugwe the spirits watched, their judgment patient but certain. As darkness descended upon the village, the brothers' fractured bond became the key to either redemption or ruin. The night after Chidi was taken, the village of Omugwe was eerily silent. The forest, once alive with the hum of cicadas and the rustle of leaves, seemed to hold its breath. The river's murky flow carried whispers of unease, as if it knew the balance of Omugwe had been irrevocably disturbed. Dyke returned from the forest alone, his face pale and drawn. When questioned by the villagers, he claimed the lion had attacked, that Chidi had bravely confronted it and had not returned. His voice faltered, but the villagers, overwhelmed with grief and fear, accepted his account. Nkem collapsed at the news, her cries piercing the stillness of the night. "My son!" she wailed, clutching at the earth outside her hut. "Chidi, my brave boy." Akine held her, his own tears streaming silently down his face. They buried their faces in their hands, mourning a son they believed lost forever. The villagers held a solemn vigil for Chidi, gathering around the ancient baobab tree to light torches and sing songs of remembrance. They spoke of his bravery, his selflessness, his unwavering love for Omugwe. Yet, in the flickering firelight, Dyke stood apart, his head bowed, his fists clenched at his sides. The guilt was suffocating. Every glance from his parents, every whispered word from the villagers, felt like an accusation. Yet Dyke told himself that he had no choice, that Chidi's shadow was too large, that his betrayal was necessary to carve his own identity. But the weight of his lie grew heavier with each passing day. The rise of Dyke. In Chidi's absence, the village turned to Dyke. Though he lacked his brother's charisma, he stepped into the role with a quiet determination. He led hunting parties, organized defenses against the lion that still haunted the outskirts, and gained the trust of King Okeke. The king, impressed by Dyke's apparent resilience, summoned him to the palace. "You have shown great strength in these trying times," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a ruler. "Omugwe needs leaders like you. From this day forward, you shall serve as chief protector." The title came with privileges, a seat at the king's council, fine robes, and the respect of the villagers. Yet each accolade felt hollow to Dyke, his accomplishments tainted by the memory of Chidi's betrayed gaze. The villagers praised him, but their words carried an unspoken question: why did you return when Chidi did not? Despite his rising status, Dyke found himself growing more isolated. He avoided the village square, where whispers of his brother lingered like ghosts. He turned his focus inward, burying himself in his duties, hoping that his actions would drown out his guilt. Chidi's captivity. Far from Omugwe, deep within the cursed forest, Chidi was alive. The outcasts who had captured him were a ruthless band of exiles, cast out of their own villages for crimes ranging from theft to murder. They operated on the fringes of society, surviving by raiding settlements and ambushing travelers. Bound and beaten, Chidi was dragged to their hidden camp, a cluster of crude shelters hidden among the dense trees. The leader of the outcasts, a scarred man named Oba, looked at Chidi with disdain. "This is the great hunter of Omugwe," Oba sneered, circling Chidi like a predator. "Hardly seems worth the effort." Despite the pain and humiliation, Chidi held his head high. His body was battered, but his spirit remained unbroken. He refused to let the outcasts see his fear. Days turned into weeks, and Chidi endured the harsh conditions of captivity. He was forced to labor for the outcasts, fetching water, chopping wood, and enduring their taunts. Yet even in the darkest moments, the voice of the spirits whispered to him. "Your journey is not over," the voice said, steady and calm. "Endure, for your destiny lies beyond this trial." Chidi clung to those words, drawing strength from them. He observed his captors closely, learning their routines, their weaknesses. He listened to their conversations, piecing together their plans. In his heart, he knew that escape was his only option. The strain on Omugwe. Back in Omugwe, the effects of the curse continued to spread. The lion's roars echoed through the forest at night, sending chills down the spines of the villagers. Crops failed despite the rains, and livestock disappeared without a trace. The river, once the village's lifeblood, grew more polluted, its once crystal waters now dark and sluggish. The villagers began to lose hope. They turned to the elders seeking answers, but the wisdom of the ancestors seemed elusive. Some whispered that the curse had been brought upon them by Chidi's death, that the spirits were angered by his loss. Nkem, however, could not shake the feeling that her son was still alive. She dreamed of him often, seeing his face, hearing his voice. "He is out there," she told Akin one night, her voice trembling with conviction. "I know it." Akin sighed, his face etched with worry. "Even if he is Nkem, what can we do? The forest is cursed. The lion still roams. We are powerless against the spirit's will." But Nkem refused to give up. She began to leave offerings by the riverbank, bowls of fruit, coins, and herbs, praying for Chidi's safe return. Her faith was unshakable, even as the village descended further into despair. Dyke's dealings. Dyke, too, was haunted by Chidi's absence. He found no solace in his new position, the title of chief protector, a constant reminder of the brother he had betrayed. Each time he stood in the palace, each time he spoke to the king, he felt the weight of his lie pressing down on him. In secret, he continued to deal with the outcasts. He met them at the forest's edge under cover of darkness, bringing them supplies in exchange for their silence. But his dealings were not without risk. The outcasts grew bolder, demanding more each time, threatening to reveal the truth if Dyke did not comply. "They know," Dyke whispered to himself one night, pacing in his hut. "The spirits know. The village will know." The fear of exposure drove him to paranoia. He began to see shadows where there were none, to hear whispers in the wind that spoke his name. The once confident young man was now a shell of himself, his ambition poisoned by guilt. The stranger's revelation. One fateful night, as Dyke sat alone in his hut, a knock came at the door. He opened it to find a tall, hooded stranger standing in the moonlight. The man's face was partially obscured, but his eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity. "Who are you?" Dyke demanded, gripping the doorframe. The stranger stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "I bring news from the north. Your brother is alive." Dyke's heart stopped. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. "Alive?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. The stranger nodded. "He is held captive by the outcasts who dwell beyond the river. I can lead you to him, but you must come alone." Dyke's mind raced. If Chidi was alive, everything he had built, his position, his power, his fragile trust, was at risk. Yet, a part of him felt an overwhelming relief at the news. The guilt he had carried for so long now had a chance to be confronted. "I will go," he said finally, his voice trembling. "Take me to him." Fate has dealt its hand, and the brothers are now on opposite paths. But the spirits are watching, and redemption may yet be possible. Can the bond of blood be restored? Find out in Part 4, Redemption and Legacy. If you've been captivated by this tale, give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a chapter of this incredible journey. Let us know in the comments. Will Dyke find redemption, or is it too late for forgiveness?